Welcome to the Garden Talk podcast, where we interview growers from all over the world, both beginners and experts, seeking to learn more about what they know about gardening and how they do things in their garden. Hey everybody, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Chris, aka Mr. Grow It, and you're tuned into the Garden Talk podcast. This is episode number 144. In this episode, I interview Joshua Steensland. He's been gardening for 27 years and is regarded as an expert when it comes to growing in living soil. He gets into several key aspects for this grow method, such as building a soil from scratch, soil microbiology, compost, and so much more. If you want to see short clips of these podcast episodes, search Garden Talk Clips on YouTube. I also have a gardening channel where I show the plants that I grow. Both of those channels will be linked down in the YouTube description section below. One of my goals for this podcast is to bring free information about gardening to the general public. That being said, I'd like to thank the sponsors of today's episode who helped make that goal possible. Thanks to AC Infinity for sponsoring this episode. Check out their Instant Potting Mix, a soilless grow medium made from 100% organic cocoa coir fiber. It's buffered and triple washed to maintain pH stability and reduce salinity. It comes in a 2-pound brick, which expands to fill up to a 3-gallon grow pot. Click the link in the description section below so you can learn more about their Instant Potting Mix, and the discount code MrGrowIt15 works on both Amazon and their website, acinfinity.com. Stash Blend. Stash Blend is a 2-1-5 plant additive that can be used with synthetic bottled nutrients or in living soil systems. Simply mix half teaspoon of Stash Blend into a gallon of water, then water your plants with it. Ingredients include corn steep liquor, seaweed extract, humic acid, beneficial bacteria, silica, and mycorrhizal fungi. Check it out at stashblend.com, link in the description section below, and use the discount code THESTASH. And we are back, and I'm joined with Joshua Steensland. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing pretty good. Thanks for coming on to the podcast. Today we're going to talk all about living soil. Now, this is an area that you have many, many years experience, so really excited to have you on the podcast today to get deep into it. But first, can you give us an introduction? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into gardening?
Sure. My name is Joshua Steensland, and I've been cultivating plants and tending gardens since about 1997 when I got out of the Marines. I really had an itch to get involved horticulturally with all kinds of plants, medicinal plants, veggie gardens, the works, and really just kind of hit the ground running. And I've been cultivating pretty much continuously since 97.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I first came across you in 2016, if I remember correctly. Came across your content. I was like, man, this guy, he's really good at dialed in. And you were doing organics and living soil back then. So you've had so many years experience here doing it. How many years have you kind of had your feet wet with living soil in particular?
Yeah, well, ironically, I think you probably came across me right around the time I was first discovering and sharing my process. So before about 2016, I would cultivate in many different styles. I used to own a couple brick and mortar hydroponic shops or garden centers in Southern Oregon. And that afforded me the opportunity to try lots of different cultivation styles: aeroponic, deep water culture, recirculating deep water culture, cocoa, the works. So I had been in the middle of lots of different transitions. I had a really bad run with a popular nutrient brand that I won't name. And I was just kind of fed up. And so I hit the ICMAG forums, and I saw a picture in a post of probably the most beautiful plant I had ever seen. And the caption underneath the picture was, "This plant was grown with nothing but water and its own shade leaves." And I was just gobsmacked, completely blown away at how that was even possible. So I went in, I just dove deep into the rabbit hole. I started with the subcool super soil type blend, and then really dove headfirst into, and a huge shout out to Jeremy at Build a Soil. His website was really, and still is, a vast resource for knowledge. And especially in those early days, there was not a lot of people talking living soil. And it really gave me the confidence to kind of jump in with both feet. And I decided at that time to just document my journey. So I started a YouTube channel, and you can watch like my first 12 cycles or something. It might only be 10 on YouTube. They're all on there, and I just kind of documenting my journey, and really got to watch the living soil methodology take off over the years. It was really great. I feel fortunate to have been in a unique position to kind of watch this rebirth of these old school cultivation techniques that are being embraced in all different sectors of horticulture and agriculture.
That's awesome. So lots of history there. Yeah, I remember when I first started, I started with the synthetic bottled nutrients and I've slowly transitioned over to the organic side of things. And it seems like the past 10 years in particular, there's been a large transition from using bottled nutrients to organics, living soil, no-till living soil, regenerative gardening, right? What is meant by living soil? So say, well, your organic gardening or your living soil, and what's the difference? Break it down for us.
Sure. So living soil, there's life everywhere. Even in the worst, like dusty dirt that has no organic matter, there's still bacteria that are present. So everything is really alive. So some people get confused with like, what does this living soil mean? And really, horticulturally speaking, it's having not just bacteria, but fungi, protozoa, microarthropods, worms. You're having a whole consortium of biology. Dr. Elaine Inge refers to it as the soil food web. I highly recommend folks going down that rabbit hole. But in a living soil system, we're paying as much or more, frankly, attention to the soil than we are the crop that we're trying to grow or trying to cultivate. And there's practices that you can do to help increase the biological diversity and the quantity of biology in your soils to really help facilitate that nutrient cycling process. So it's really all about biology in diversity and in the correct quantities in order for it to kind of be a quote unquote living soil system.
Okay. So if someone were to use organic inputs, for example, they add in organic inputs throughout the growth cycle, they do that initial mending to begin, of course, and then they add in microbial inoculants, for example. Would that be considered a living soil system, or do they also need worms and they need to use compost? And where's like the line, I guess, when it comes to true living soil versus just growing organically with organic inputs? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think that's a really good question, and that's a kind of a hard distinction to make because there's a lot of gray area on the lines outside of these definitions. So I think for me personally, and I've really struggled hard with trying to not be an absolutist in this game, because first off, that can come across as holier than thou, or it can come across as like, oh, we know everything. When really we just know what we've been doing, and we share my experience. And I can't say that my definition is the absolutist definition, but I think the most people in the living soil community would agree that there's so many different ways to tackle fertility. And I don't poo-poo on people who use organic amendments or even organic kind of soluble nutrients, as long as you're still paying attention to the soil biology and you're not doing anything that's a detriment to the soil biology. You can still amend, you can still foliar feed with your plants, you can do all kinds of different things outside of just tending to soil, putting worms, and using water only, which happens to be kind of my minimalist approach. I don't use a lot of top dresses, I don't use anything like that. But when other people do, I don't say, oh, you're not living soil. uh, as long as if worms can live in your system and you're not killing your worms, then you've got a living soil system. To be frank, they're like the canary in the coal mine. They will scram if anything's weird. They will scram. They will not survive. And if what you're doing, if the variable that you're adding to your system, it makes it to where you can't have that kind of life in your system, I would start to question whether you have a living soil system.
Thanks for breaking that down for us. I feel like that's an area where there's so much confusion.
I agree, though. I think that distinction needs to be made because a lot of folks have this really absolutist approach and this kind of all or nothing approach when it comes to regenerative agriculture in general, and it can be off-putting to people who are trying to get in, who are trying to just trying to understand the system and trying to convert maybe a salt system into a living soil system. It's nice to know that you've gotten flexibility and leeway with how to apply these techniques and still qualify as a living soil system.
Got it. So how does the overall health and productivity of plants grown in living soil differ from plants grown in other systems such as synthetic nutrients in soil or hydroponics?
Yeah, that's another great question. I think, with hydroponics and salt-based systems, you get very rapid growth, especially in the vegetative stage of certain plants, so that you get very fast growth. And if that's your only metric for success or for plant health, then that really kind of keeps people in that system, because there's like, oh, my plants grow very fast and they look very green and they're beautiful, and that's your only metric, then that tends to work. But in an organic system, you might get a little, your veg time might be a little lower, but the overall health of your plant is going to be the same or better than a salt-based system, and that's just based on my experience. I know plenty of my friends and plenty of my very good colleagues. They grow using salt-based nutrients. They've just done it forever, and that's what they do. And they've got their systems dialed. And I'll still smoke their material. I've got many friends that grow in with salt-based nutrients, and I have no problem going over to their house, eating their fruits and veggies, because I know that they're doing things properly. They're flushing things properly, and they're not. They care about what they're putting out. They care about what their end product is. So, and once again, I'm not an absolutist in that sense where I just, if people aren't growing in living soil, then I'm shaming them or anything like that, because I think there's plenty of room for everybody to cultivate the way they're comfortable. I just, in my experience, happen to have experienced a greater degree of success and a higher level of quality when going the organic route.
Understood. Yeah, I think that debate is going to be going on for many years from now. What's better, living soil or growing with synthetic inputs? And, it's not something we're really going to get deeper into in this episode. I have other episodes where we kind of get deeper into the differences there. But yeah, it was interesting to get your thoughts on the differences there. Let's get into soil microbiology next. I want to get deeper into that and how it works in living soil. Are you able to kind of break it down for us, how different microorganisms benefit plant growth?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm no Dr. Elaine, but I think I've got a pretty good grasp. I actually did her foundation course, and I found it really, really beneficial for me to connect some of the dots as far as what I was experiencing with plant health and plant fertility. And so the takeaway with the biology is, once again, as I referenced the soil food web earlier, if you just have bacteria in your system, which is everywhere, I mean, bacteria is literally everywhere. It's out. If I remember right, they're finding bacteria that survive on the outside of the space shuttle when it goes into the vacuum of space, and at the Mariana Trench at the really hot vents. There's just bacteria everywhere. So we're not really concerned about our bacteria levels as long as there's not bad bacteria. But what we really want to see, and especially in row crops, vegetables, medicinal plants, those type of things, we really want a 1-to-1 bacterial to fungal ratio. So the hard part for a lot of soils and agricultural soils is getting the organic matter up to the level where you can start to increase fungal diversity and aerobic fungal diversity specifically. And so, if you have a system where you have plenty of bacteria and fungi, you might think that you've made it. But to be honest, that all of your nutrient that the bacteria and fungi are mining from your organic matter, and hopefully you have beautiful agricultural soils with lots of organic matter. That's where the bacteria and fungi mine minerals and nutrients that they in turn exchange with the plants. And a lot of that nutrient and mineral can get locked up in the living bodies of the bacteria and fungi. And so there needs to be a predator, a higher order predator in that system that kind of facilitates their demise. So you really want the protozoa in there to get at those bacteria and fungi, and then will now in turn release some of that soluble nutrient that's going to be right kind of around the rhizosphere of the plant. So the plant works in conjunction with the biology to get what it needs. Without getting too specific and drilling down into some of the specifics, a byproduct of photosynthesis in the plant creates carbohydrates. The plant is so intelligent, it has the ability to formulate that carbohydrate from moment to moment, and then at night it sends it back down into the root zone, and that those exudates cover the root zone, and depending on the formulation of the exudate, it attracts whatever biology has the plant needs. So if the plant needs a very specific micronutrient, it will, and it already knows that the biology that likes that micronutrient and has it stored in its bodies likes this specific configuration of carbohydrate. It attracts it to the root zone, and then the soil food web does its thing, and everything is kind of released in a soluble plant-ready form there at the rhizosphere. So it's really important not just to have bacteria and fungi, but it's important to have those the protozoa as well to help release that trapped nutrient and mineral. And then on the way up, the microarthropods and all those other things, those just work on your organic matter, and they have waste products that are beneficial to the system. So, really just like you want to see in nature, you want to see a diverse population of life flourishing in your system. When you have that, then you're kind of working in accordance with nature. And the way plants work with soil is so supremely designed. It's unbelievable how amazingly adept and the plants are at feeding themselves. They do not need our help. They do not need us in there fidgeting around with things for them. As long as you have biology, organic matter, moisture, sun, and a plant, it's going to do its thing. You just have to know and trust that process, and that comes with experience and just doing it.
You mentioned protozoa, and I feel like a lot of folks will rely on micro products in order to kind of enhance the microbiology in their soil, right? And I feel like a lot of these micro products don't have protozoa in it. Would you happen to know why?
No, I think because they're a little bit larger life form and a little more fragile than say like a bacteria have a really good ability to kind of preserve themselves if they get into a dry or a hot or an undesirable condition. A lot of them have ways to just kind of like go into like a suspended animation, and then when the moisture content is correct again, they'll come back. Protozoa don't really have that ability. They're a little more fragile. I mean, I think amoeba will go into like a testate form when they get shaken up, but I don't think that they're very tolerant of drought or anything like that. So their kind of fragility lends to them being the kind of the first ones to go when you have a systemic issue or a crash, or you've let your system dry out. But the wonderful thing about that is that if all you have to do is get your system back into balance and get your organic matter right, get your moisture right, protozoa will arrive. They'll just arrive. And if you have any kind of compost or vermicompost, there's tons of protozoa in fresh worm castings. If you do a thermophilic compost, there's going to be tons of protozoa. I've never seen the Johnson-Su kind of bioreactor material under a microscope, but I've heard lots of really good things about that composting process. So There's ways to just kind of reintroduce them into your system um, at random intervals or at set intervals to ensure that you're kind of keeping your protozoa and your bacterial to fungal populations correct.
That's interesting. I didn't know if a lot of people know about that. So yeah, if you're adding in worm castings, you're adding in protozoa as well. So that's really good to know. Now, how about micro products? We kind of talked about that a bit. A lot of people do rely on micro products to inoculate the medium with microbes. However, the diversity there is pretty limited, right? Now you could go out and do the IMO process and get more diversity. Can you kind of talk to us about the difference between inoculating with a micro product versus the IMO process? Maybe some of the pros and cons to both of them?
Yeah, sure. So look, I think there's a lot of kind of what are lovingly referred to as bugs in a jug products out there. And my very basic kind of rudimentary understanding of this, I'm not going to pretend to be the expert in this, but my basic general understanding is that you do better in your cultivation system if you can gather those microbes kind of regionally. Otherwise, you're very limited, like you said, to a very specific type of biology, and sometimes they might not be suited for your region. And so what you end up doing is you just end up applying a bunch of biology to your system that just ends up being food for your native biology, which causes a bloom in biology, and you're like, oh wow, the product worked great. And maybe it did. Maybe if that's one of the functions of those products, then that still technically works. Maybe just not in the same modality that people are thinking when they're applying it. Um, and there also, based off of the schooling, the stuff that I learned at the Soil Food Web School, was a lot of those bugs in the jug recipes have like some kind of acid in there to stabilize it, to make it shelf stable, and that can have a negative impact on your native biology as well. So I've always just tried to avoid those products and work to cultivate that biology on my own property or in my own region. Once again, via thermal composting. I've never done IMO collection. I know lots of people who do. Lots of people who are really have found great success taking bits and pieces of the KNF practices and applying them to their system. And I think obviously one of the most successful things that you can do outside of like FPJs and stuff is that IMO collection technique is really stellar. And I'm really intrigued by that process, and I really like to see people follow through with it. I've never done it. I've focused more on the vermicomposting side and the thermophilic composting side to make the biocomplete compost, and I've just had great success with that, and just felt like if I'm getting the biology into my system this way, I just really didn't need to venture into that other technique. That being said, I encourage people to try as many of these techniques and find out which one scratches your itches, which one feels good. Lots of people are A-type and they like to be busy and they like to do things and feel like they're participating. I'm more of a hands-off. I like to just kind of set it and forget it. I don't like to spend hours in my grow. I like to just go in and look at it and be like, things are great. See you later. I'm going to apply compost to my beds twice a year, or maybe even just once a year, and just kind of leave it at that. And I don't fuss over things. But if there's people who are like super A-type, I encourage them to check those things out. Try the things, build the cedar box, take it out to the woods, do all those things, and I'm sure it'll feel great, and you'll get great results.
I'm just like you. I haven't had the chance to do the IMO process. I've just like you, been focusing on vermicomposting, and
Oh, cool.
I think a lot of people are under have the misconception that if you're not doing the IMO process, then you're not doing it right. And I think that's just the wrong way to think about things. I think there are other ways to get to the finish line. Like you mentioned, the vermicomposting, that's another way where you can create biology, get biology, maintain it, and take it from your vermicompost system and then put it into your garden, whether it be an outdoor garden or indoor garden with grow pots or containers. There are multiple ways to get to that goal of increasing the microbial population in the medium. So yeah, that's some really good info that you shared with us right there. And I'm glad you expanded on it and mentioned it in that way. Let's get into building soil from scratch. A lot of folks that are just getting started and they want to start off with a living soil. What's your recommendations? What should people use for materials in order to start to build their own living soil?
I think there's a couple ways that you can tackle this. You could build your own, and that's, I highly recommend people venture into doing that. It really gets you more connected to your system and gets you more familiar with sourcing the ingredients and understanding how difficult that could be sometimes. Or you can go through a company like Keep It Simple or any of these other Build a Soil that have these really great kind of custom blends, and most of those are based off of the Coots recipe. I don't know if many of your growers would be familiar with Clackamas Coot, or many of your viewers would be familiar with Clackamas Coot. He's been a little less vocal on social media over the past 5 years or so, but early on, around the time I first started to come on, his soil blend or soil recipe had become very, very popularized, and most living soil blends you're going to find here in the States are going to be basically a variation of the Coots recipe. And it's changed a little bit over the years, and some people like Mountain Organics have really kind of tweaked it. And it's a 1/3 compost, 1/3 like aeration, and 1/3 peat or cocoa. I think a lot of people are still using peat. I've never done cocoa in a living soil blend. I think there's some unique differences there. And then that being your base, you add your nutrients and minerals, and that's where things get interesting, because people take that recipe and do all kinds of things with it. Some people just use, like Mountain Organics for a while, was just using glacial rock dust at like 4 cups per cubic foot of base, and it was doing great with that. Like, was just doing amazing. So I think, you could use that. You could look at that Coots base and then just add, kind of mess with it and add things. If you got a crustacean mix, you can add. You've got, kelp, all these different things that you can add to it, and you're going to have some fun and get acquainted with putting those systems together. Is really good and beneficial for your cultivation journey. If you don't have time or patience for those things, like I said, just getting into a reputable company that's been producing soil for living soil cultivators for years, literally a decade or more, some of these companies, and you can't go wrong. It's hard to go wrong.
So with any living soil recipe, most of the time nutrients are going to deplete, right? So unless it's, quote, a super soil to where it's a water only recipe, for example, of course, it's going to depend on how long you veg the plants for, but some of them you can just do the initial mending and then you just water only for the rest of the cycle. Other recipes, which a majority of the recipes, the nutrients are going to deplete at some point. For those recipes, what organic inputs do you typically add in throughout the growth cycle, and when do you add them in?
Yeah, this tends to be a very hotly debated topic amongst agronomists and especially large scale agriculturists and horticulturists. I have a differing opinion. So there's two trains of thought when it comes to fertility and available nutrients. And just to kind of briefly describe the two different camps, well, and then there's kind of three, but there's one that's in the middle. So the far off to one side, I don't want to say right or left, but far off to one side is the Dr. Elaine camp, which I tend to be in. And that camp is, and that's based off of what I've learned in going through her foundation course material, and then also how that information laid over my experience and really helped connect a lot of dots. And so, according to Dr. Elaine, as long as you have adequate biology, once again, diversity and quantities, and aerobic, and you have adequate organic matter, that biology will be able to mine whatever nutrient, whatever mineral that crop needs, whether it's corn, potatoes, medicinal plants, tomatoes, herbs, any of that. Her body of work has led her to the conclusion that all nutrient needs for all plants can be met entirely and completely with biology and organic matter. And so if you go by that, then really all you need to do is keep track of your biology, make sure that your biology is flourishing, and make sure you've got plenty of organic matter. And if you follow those two rules, you'll be able to continuously crop without ever really having to amend. She goes as far as to say you don't even need to get a chemistry analysis. Now, when I say these words, I can see the heads exploding in your viewership right now, because there's lots of people who are going to say hogwash, and they're going to fish shake at that. And I get it. I totally understand. For me personally, I started not understanding the soil food web, but just kind of trusting the process and really wanting to see how little I could do. How many variables can I exclude from my system and still pull off a viable crop? Not just a viable, but better than average, right? And I was experiencing that for years. Once again, you can go back into my YouTube and look at my first 6 cycles, and I talk about these very things. I have not, in the over 10 years I've had my beds and the soil that I've had now, I've never done one chemistry analysis on my soil. And my yield numbers are the same from day one, from 10 years ago. They're the same. And all I've been doing for the past about 5 years is just adding compost or vermicompost or some kind of compost extract to my system to maintain biology, because I know my system has plenty of organic matter. So you can take that kind of ultra extremist biological approach to cultivation and you'll be just fine. I'm a testament to that. We've set up commercial cultivation facilities with the same ideology, and they do great. They do amazing. We've done large scale outdoor fiber and hemp crops that we've put nutrient blends in half of the acreage and then left the other half of the acreage without any nutrient whatsoever, just water and native soil, which was woefully inadequate with organic matter, and they produced the same. The yields were the same in one half of the field to the other. And we were adding, it was costing $550 an acre to add that nutrient. So over 100 acres, $55,000 that was not needed at all. We could have used that $55,000 anywhere else. The other half of the acreage that we didn't put the nutrient mix on did exactly the same. You could not tell the difference one field to the next, one row to the next. So that to me spoke volumes about the power of biology and the power of this soil food web. Now, that being said, that doesn't do it for some folks. There's a lot of folks that are so tied into the chemistry part of it that they have to know the chemistry. And so that's the other side, is the people that completely ignore biology and only focus on chemistry. And you find that those are the people that are using the salt-based chemical fertilizers and pesticides and all those other things. They live in that camp. And somewhere in the middle is a guy named John Kemp, and his company is Advancing Ecological Agriculture. They're huge. They're gigantic. He firmly believes in the biological portion. He's actually been on podcasts with Dr. Elaine. They've had some really interesting conversations about the way there are two different takes on this. He is not ready to just drink the Kool-Aid and go 100% biology, even though he knows that the biology supersedes the chemistry in any kind of cultivation system. Biology will always supersede chemistry. And so what he's done with a lot of big conventional ag guys, is that he's come to the table and said, hey, look, let's focus on biology and then let's watch what happens to our chemistry. And so he's utilizing the data that conventional farmers have relied on for generations or for decades, right? This chemistry data, and exposing them to the biological data and saying, hey, look what happens when we marry these two. Look at the changes that take place. And he's done a really good job at convincing farmers that, one, they can remove certain things from their system because it's not beneficial. You know, the biology is not present to process the raw amendment that you're putting down. You're just leaving money on the table, or you're literally letting it blow away in the wind. And so he's combining these two methodologies to really bring conventional ag into the fold. And then where he differs from Dr. Lane is that he says, hey, look, yeah, you can let the natural order drive cultivation and drive fertility, but if you're producing a cash crop and you are trying to maximize, you can drive that in an organic way while still keeping in mind what's happening with your biology and not doing anything that's going to have negative impact on that. So over the years, where I went from this very hardcore Dr. Elaine purist, you know, wouldn't even tell a client to get a soil test or anything. Now I kind of understand the John Kemp ideology, where it's really, you know, like let's leverage the data that most people are relying on. They really want to see that chemistry data, and let's just kind of use that to kind of prove the concept of what's happening. And then you can drive your crop. You can drive your crop. I know Steve Cantwell, Good Life Productions, they do chemistry analysis, but they're still very heavily biologically focused. And one of my colleagues, Matt Davenport, with Amada Designs, he's very much the same way. I think he had a hand in designing GLP, and so I've really kind of eased off of that hardcore purist. Not when it comes to my personal grow. In my personal grow, I'm still very hardcore. I still don't do chemistry analysis. I still don't top feed or top dress anything that I think I might be missing. I just focus on my biology. My crops are great. My yields are great. I'm a happy camper. That just doesn't cut it for other folks. So if I work with somebody on a personal basis, or I'm working with a client that has a commercial grow, I'll introduce this kind of John Kemp or kind of a Matt Davenport or Steve Cantwell's kind of ideology, where, hey, look, let's take a peek at the chemistry, let's see where we're at, and let's just make sure that we're at those numbers, because that makes everybody feel happy. And so I'm not opposed to that. So I don't have a lot of experience, kind of a long way around to answering your question. I don't have a lot of experience with adding amendments to systems, because I've just been mainly focused on biological driven fertility systems. And I have no interest in, you know, pushing my crop to yield 15% more by tweaking certain numbers. Not that it can't be done, just have no interest in it. And I've had really a great level of success just kind of being on that other extreme end. But that being said, there's lots of data and information and podcasts that people can digest. Like, I highly recommend John Kemp. Anything that he's got is just really, I've learned so much from his material that it can scratch that itch. Once again, if you're the A type that really likes to be in charge and really likes to know everything that's going on, there's a methodology and a template for you to achieve that.
I think it might be a bit eye-opening for some of the viewers here, some of the listeners here, when we talk about some of these prominent figures, such as Dr. Laningham versus John Kemp, who they've got different insight and different data and different ways to go about it. A lot of people reference Dr. Bruce Bugbee, and they say he's the end-all be-all, is that what he says goes,
Sure.
and everybody else is wrong, you know?
Right.
But there are a lot of scientists out there that disagree with his ways to go about it, right?
Yep.
Next topic we're going to get into here, but I just have a follow-up question for you. But the next topic, when we get into teas, there's actually some pretty big disagreement in regards to some high-level scientists who disagree whether or not you should do teas.
Sure.
But before we get into teas, you mentioned you do compost only, right? Can you give us some insight into just like how much compost and how often you apply it?
Yeah. So with my methodology, it tends to be, once again, frustrating to the A types, because I'm just really run very intuitively. um, I'm fortunate enough to have a very well-established beds. Before I moved to my new location, my current location, about a year and a half ago, the beds that I had were in 3 4 by 8 by 1s, and they were like 8 years old. So very established beds. Just I could put anything in them and they would just flourish. It wouldn't have to really do anything as long as the moisture levels were on point. Everything was great. I moved into my new place and I had to add about 2.5 yards of new soil to the new beds that I built. So I've kind of got like a layered system where my upper part of my bed is the newer soil and the lower part is that older aged soil. So I really have this benefit of having a large storehouse of organic matter and biological activity deep in my beds. So I really feel like I could go quite a while without ever having to amend. Um, because look, if you're cultivating in your system and it's not just sitting there not doing anything, then that cultivation process with mulching and living, if you got companion plants or cover crops going, all of that is contributing to new life in your system and sustaining the life that's there. So you could theoretically build a living soil system and never really add compost ever, as long as you're cultivating the system. I mean, out in nature in the forest, there's nobody out there spreading compost around. It just is kind of that natural humic layer is just there. It's developed over time, and you can build that same type of system with your system, and just kind of allowing the natural process to build over time. You don't have major dry out events or major flooding events or any of those things. Those will be setbacks, but eventually your system would build back up. So what I do is I just kind of once or twice a year add compost to my soil. I do have a microscope. I do take periodic microscopy readings just to kind of analyze, make sure everything's good. But after doing so many slides, you really just kind of know when your soil's on point. If I ended up having an overwatering event and I felt like I had an anaerobic pocket, I would try to analyze and make sure I didn't have any pathogenic fungi or any of the bad biology present in the system that could have a deleterious effect. But really, that's never happened. So I've stopped using the microscope almost entirely. I still think it's a valuable tool, but I've built compost so much, and my system is so stable that I know when I have good compost, and I know when my system is good, and I just kind of intuitively amend. A lot of people aren't going to like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people's thought process is that you're growing a plant and then you're removing that biomass and all the, as the plant's growing, obviously the nutrients being uptaken by the
Yep.
plant. So when you remove that biomass, you're removing the nutrients from the system. So that's when adding in more inputs is, a requirement really for the most part. It's not like the out in the forest where nobody touches and stuff. Well, the leaves are falling down, right? And then they're breaking down, but everything's kind of being recycled within the same area. But when you're removing that biomass, I think that's a concern for a lot of people.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's where um, trying to wrap your head around and having a deeper understanding of kind of the Dr. Elaine ideology, where look, you don't need to worry about what the plant is taking out of the system because it'll just be replenished. Like she had lots of in that course I took, there was lots of graphs and information and data where they took organic matter and extracted it and calculated how much nitrogen was available in just kind of basic organic matter that you would find in soils. And it far exceeded the amount of nitrogen that was available to be mined, not plant ready or available, but available to be mined by biology, was like 4 times the needs of some of your most nitrogen hungry crops like corn. That like quite literally, there is so much nutrient and mineral. Now, of course, if you're in a sandy desert, that and you're dealing with very heavy sand soil, that's going to play a factor. And I think that's where John Kemp comes in and is like, hey, look, not every agricultural soil this is going to work with, but given enough time and enough organic matter, you could convert that sandy soil into really good tillith and find yourself in a situation where you have actually superb superb organic matter content and thusly nutrient cycling capability. So that's a tough pill for a lot of folks to swallow. When you tell somebody that they could get all the nutrients they need out of the organic matter in your dirt and biology, they don't buy it. I challenge folks to try to step out of this absolutist approach and just look into it. Maybe try it. Maybe try growing without amending your soil every 6 months, or just see what happens. If you think that you've gotten to the point where you're low, run a cycle. Run a cycle. See where your yields and where your numbers are at. And my guess is that you're going to find that there's going to be a negligible difference between the two, so negligible that any number of variable could have contributed to whatever difference you're seeing. So, yeah, I hold hard and stand hard and fast to that fact that you can literally get whatever you need in perpetuity, as long as you're cultivating in that system. As long as you've got adequate organic matter and biology, your plants will be able to mine exactly what they need, precisely what they need.
Awesome. Yeah, you mentioned Dr. Elaine Ingham's course, and I've been wanting to take that for several years now. It's just so hard to find the time, you know.
Yeah,
And, I've got a daughter now, and so all
sure.
my time is occupied by her. And but eventually, it's on my list of courses to tackle. There's so many good courses out there, and so many
Agreed.
great teachers out there. But she's definitely that course in particular. I think she has a couple different courses. I definitely want to go through at least one of them here in the upcoming years.
Yeah, highly recommended. Foundation course material was a real eye opener for me.
Let's get into brewing teas. Now, this is an area, like I mentioned, but people are split upon,
Yeah.
right? So you've got different teas. First off, you've got everything from nutrient teas, manure teas. You've got teas that focus on increasing the microbiology. But you have folks that brew the teas and say it's great, successful, it's very beneficial. But you've got there's one scientist in particular, I can't remember her name, but she had mentioned they're completely pointless. Nobody should be brewing teas. Adding compost and then watering in that compost is just as beneficial. What's your take on brewing teas?
Yeah, no, it is definitely a hot topic. I think folks are not going to be surprised that my concept of tea application. I think first off, I think there needs to be an important distinction that needs to be made between what's commonly referred to as a tea and what should be classified as an extract. And so what an extract is just basically simply what the name states it is. You're basically just extracting biology from a medium, whether it's vermicompost or thermophilic compost. You're putting some of your high quality biocomplete compost that has all the protozoa and necessary fungi and bacteria in there, and it's all attached, basically glued and stuck to the organic matter in your compost. You put that into like a 220 bag or paint bag or whatever, your bubble bag, reused old bubble bag 220 thing, and we would use that to the gently dunk the compost in and out of kind of room temperature water, and slowly agitating and knocking off the biology from the organic matter, and then suspending it into the liquid matrix, right? So now you've got this liquid that's just full of floating biology, and that's a really great way to introduce concentrated biology, because you could use 3 or 4 cups, dunk it into a 5-gallon bucket for a minute or 90 seconds or 2 minutes, and then get another one, a fresh load. It's like putting 2 tea bags of Earl Grey in your morning tea. You're going to get a stiff cup of tea, or stiff extract, we should say. So, by doing that, you could really kind of control the concentration of biology in whatever you're suspending, in the water you're suspending it in. And so, what the benefit of that is that when you water that in, it really travels with the water, penetrates deep into the root zone where you really want that biology to reside. Very few variables, considering your compost was properly made, you've properly analyzed it, you know you don't have bad guys in there, it's not anaerobic or any of those other things, and you're not basically just adding concentrated anaerobes to your system, assuming that all of those factors have been met and you've got a really great stellar product, you're just going to be adding those concentrated microbes directly to the root zone where they belong. And that's the safest way with the fewest variables to introduce biology into your system. Now, a tea, what people call tea. Some people would call the extract a tea. I think we should get away from that. I think we should call an extract, and we should call anything that we actively brew, anything that we're brewing for 4 hours, 12 hours, 36 hours, 72 hours. There's all kinds of recipes. And this is, I think, where some people have issue. And I'll say that there is a time and place for a brewed compost tea. And I think that, and this is what I learned taking Dr. Elaine's course. I don't want to sound like a one-trick pony or just tooting one horn the whole time, but she really like lays things out in a great way. When you brew a tea, usually you're adding a food source. It's highly oxygenated. And so what's happening is when you add a food source and lots of oxygen, that biology is going to multiply and it's going to breed. I think bacterial colonies, they double every 20 minutes. So there's an exponential growth rate that takes place when you're brewing a tea. And it's this process that if you do it right, you can leverage it in your favor. If you don't do it right, you can be doing nothing at all, or you could actually be causing harm to your system, compounding harm to your system over time. And I'll explain a little better. So an extract, great for the root zone. The biology is just suspended in the water, flows down with the water, colonizes the root zone, gets back onto organic matter in the soil, starts doing its business. Let's say you brew a tea. That doubling, that multiplication process, the biology just getting busy in there, doing their thing, creates a very sticky, glomalin, kind of gluey type substance. And you can use that to your benefit by only applying that as a foliar. Because now what happens is you've got all of that biology encased in a slimy, sticky glue. And when you spray it onto the surface of a plant or onto the trunk of a plant, that water is carrying that sticky substance. Boom, it slaps onto the leaf, and then the water falls off and leaves the biology behind on the surface of the leaf. And so now you've got active biology ready to populate the entire surface of your plant and literally create a castle wall, a microscopic wall of biology that covers all of your plant. So when outside spores land on the plant and try to hook in and do its thing, there's nowhere for it to go. It's literally landing on something else, right? That's landing on that biological film that's taking place. If you take that sticky, gluey tea substance and you try to water it into the soil, it's all going to get stuck at the top layer of your soil and it's not going to penetrate down deep. So taking an actively brewed tea and applying it to your root zone, I don't know if it's been quantified, like how much is not making it down to the bottom, but the vast majority of it's going to get trapped at that upper layer, and that upper layer is the most volatile. That upper layer is the layer that dries out first, and when it dries out, the biology dies, the amoeba go into testate form, and then eventually they die if the moisture doesn't get back up. So you've taken all this time to create a tea, and what you're trying to accomplish is being reduced by 80%, or even if it's 30% reduction in what's being delivered to the system. You kind of have to weigh things out and is this even worth it? So if you can think of teas as a foliar application and extracts as a root zone application, you're going to eliminate a lot of variables that could lend itself to undesirable results or just kind of results that are meh. So I think if you follow those two rules, you'll be fine. Now, with the brewing aspect of it, if you're brewing a tea without the aid of microscopy, you're really just rolling the dice. What happens is when you've got biology in there and they're reproducing at this exponential rate, they will eventually, and in very short order, use up all of the available oxygen. It doesn't matter how big of an air pump you've got pumping into your 200 gallons of water or whatever. You'll eventually reach a tipping point of biological population that they simply have used all the oxygen available. You can't add enough oxygen when it reaches a certain point. Now, at that point, you have an anaerobic brew. And all of that good biology that you had bloomed or grew over 12 hours or 24 hours is now starting to die because there's not enough oxygen, and they're being replaced by anaerobes. There's this window when this is happening that you're not going to be able to tell with your olfactory senses that you've gone anaerobic. Now, obviously, you let it go long enough, it's going to smell like sewage. You can be like, hey, I'm anaerobic. But there's going to be a period where it's going to smell earthy. It's going to smell okay. You're going to be like, oh man, I can drink this. Like, this is great. But it's not great because now because oxygen has been depleted. Now you've created an environment where anaerobes thrive. And that's where all your harmful pathogenic things reside. So I understand where people are like, don't brew, don't brew teas because once again, if you're not visually seeing what's happening in there, you are literally rolling the dice. If your source material was full of anaerobes and that's what you're using, and you're just breeding more anaerobes, like you really could be causing yourself more problems in your system, or just not doing anything at all and just wasting time and money, which time is the most precious thing that I have, and I hate wasting it. And so I basically stick to straight extracts. I don't even really do teas for foliar applications. I've just really never felt that necessary. Now, if I had an orchard and there was all kinds of fungal threats to my orchard, and regular foliar applications made more sense, then I'd be doing that. But the kind of crops that I'm involved with just don't have that kind of pressure. So I'm more concerned with making sure that my soil is healthy and the soil biology is active, and then whatever foliars I do are strictly for nutrient or exudate enrichment tactics or strategies.
So would you say that it's impossible to answer the question when somebody says how long brewing tea is too long?
Yeah, because I mean, there's so many different variables as to like what your starting material was like. What's the temperature where you're brewing it? Are you brewing it in a 45-degree pole barn, in February in the Northeast, or are you doing it in 110-degree weather, out in the sun beating down on it? There's going to be so many different variables. It's really hard to say, and the best, most responsible answer is when you can just have it analyzed. There's plenty of soil food web labs that will analyze your material. They'll analyze what you've got and let you know whether you've got good guys or bad guys, or it's safe to use. Look, if you've got a cash crop, even if it's just your hobby situation, $80 for a test is not the end of the world as far as I'm concerned, to get that peace of mind and know where you reside. And on the flip side of that too, like, learning how to use the microscope and identify the constituents of what you want to find in there, it would be well worth it as well. It's not hard. I'm not a brilliant person. I was able to learn the things and able to apply them in a way that was effective and created a nice level of understanding that provided comfort in what I was doing, and not just kind of doing things willy-nilly, which is fine. Proof's in the pudding. But at some level, I wanted to know why it was working and how it was working. And the microscope really just aided in seeing what was happening at this level that we can't see.
I had a feeling you were going to say that there was too many variables in order to
100%.
answer the question
Yeah.
on the time length there.
Less is more. Just do 4 hours, 6 hours. You're going to get plenty of reproduction in that amount of time. Obviously, the longer you go, the longer chance you have of depleting your oxygen. And obviously, the smaller vessel you're brewing in, if you're brewing in a 5-gallon bucket for 72 hours, you do not have an aerobic mix at the end of that. I'm pretty confident in saying that you're definitely going to be tipping the scales into the anaerobic, and so less is more. If you could do a 4-hour brew and that makes you feel better and you're good, then do it, because there's every 20 minutes the microbial population, the bacterial population doubles every 20 minutes. So 12 hours is a long time when you've got this exponential growth, and certainly 72.
Good to know. Man, what a conversation. We have reached the hour mark here, and man, there's a lot more we could have got into in this episode, but I think we might have to get you back on another episode if you're willing to come back on in the future here at some point.
I'd be thrilled.
That would be awesome. Yeah, we can get into things such as like cover crops, companion planting, mulch layers. There's managing pest diseases in an all natural way. There's so many different things that we can get into that relate to living soil. So I'd love to have you on for a part 2. But let's wrap things up here. Can you tell listeners how they can find you and what you have upcoming in the future?
Yeah, so basically you can really just find me on Instagram. I just use my name. I don't use a handle. So it's just Joshua C. Steensland on Instagram. I do have a YouTube channel with a lot of like that older material. It's still valuable. A lot of that, there's a few things that have changed in the living soil community since then, but nothing that's major enough to invalidate the system. So by all means, go back, watch some of those earlier, some no-till live stream talks. They're about 8 years old now. So there's some good information there. And like I said, you can reach me on Instagram. I'm pretty much not doing much these days corporate-wise. I've really just kind of taken the chance to relax and kind of work on this property that we just acquired a year and a half ago. But I'm always open to answer questions. Anybody has any questions, just DM me. It might take me a day or two, but I typically get back to everybody.
Sweet. Well, I'll definitely have a link to Joshua's Instagram and maybe YouTube channel down in the YouTube description section below, so you can easily get to him and give him a follow or a subscription. Big shout out to all the Patreon folks. Patreon.com/Mr. Growit. 100% of what is donated there goes right back into the podcast. Everything from the editor fee to the fee for the editing software to the fee to the virtual studio that we use to record these podcasts. Thank you for your contributions. You are really what keep this podcast going. And I'm going to scroll on the screen right now the contributors that are in the producer tier. So different tiers that you can join, whether you get early access to these episodes before they're posted, or you get producer credits, or even merch or my book. So there are different tiers. Check that out if you get a chance. And yeah, just want to say thank you so much, Joshua, once again, for coming on to the podcast. Great episode. Looking forward to a part 2 at some point in the future. And hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You as well. It was my pleasure.
Peace out, everyone. Catch you in the next episode.